a lot of the speakers, joining us, some of them were not granted visas by the Pakistani government, so they have to join us online. Which is ridiculous because if they're here speaking with us online, they might as well be here in person, but they weren't given their visas. So with apologies to Ms. Vrinda also. I heard you speak at the last session and you spoke about how, if I'm not wrong, your father was born in Lahore. And it's unfortunate that you're so close to us, but you're not able to physically be present. And the second announcement is that we welcome you to use social media to tweet or to post on Instagram or Facebook about this session. The hashtag is AJConf, so AJCONF 21. So we welcome you to join the conversation online as well. And we're also very happy that a lot of people have joined online and are watching this. So I'll begin with Ms. Rakshanda Naz, and as ombudsperson for protection against harassment of women at the workplace, you get a lot of cases, and recently we've seen some very landmark decisions coming from your office also that we must really appreciate. But I wanted to ask you that, what are the instances of victim blaming that you see in the cases that come to your office? And how do you really deal with that? Is there sort of counseling of them? And I know that under the law of 2010 for protection of women against harassment at the workplace, it's part of the government's responsibility and the ombudsperson's office to also increase awareness around the law. So for example, every institution or organization has to display the law in public, at the workplace, and there has to be a committee at the workplace which must include at least one woman member also, a high-level committee that hears cases of harassment. So G, over to you, and we would love to hear, of your experience and how victim blaming plays in. Thank you.
Thank you and Assalamu alaikum. It's really honor because I still remember when Asma Jahangir first time I met her in Peshawar High Court. At that time, I was just an intern. So since then, we were coming to Lahore, and my initial activism was purely because of her inspiration to me. So I think I want to congratulate her daughters, and particularly AGHS and her organization for continuing this legacy. The victim blaming, because victim blaming, being a woman ombudsperson, the first of all, when I joined this office in 2019, the first of the criticism was because of my background, because of being a human rights activist. And they said, ab to mardon ki khair nahi hai, because they just blame the institution, and they believe if the woman ombudsperson is there, there will be no justice for men in that institution. Then basically, for institutional framework, I was thinking, because this is the only period for me, and I was not sure whether they will let me continue this with my pace or not, because after joining of this position, the first attack happened after 2 months when my vehicle was robbed. So I thought this is the only time where I can make some baseline or institutionalize some of the things. So we started setting up committees, and then some of the action, those can be continue even if they throw out an activist ombudsperson. So anyhow, luckily we set up database, and we sent notices to all government institutions. And the first 2 years of our office, we given time to everyone to set up standing inquiry committees in each institution. And then the institution, they refused to set up a standing inquiry committee for harassment. So we issue fine notices to them. So luckily, now we have a quite good number of standing inquiry committees. Then in the cases, because when we're talking about the victim blaming, even within this thinking exists within the government setup, because I still remember on my first week, most of my team members, they said, look, the women are coming and they just bringing fake cases. They believe if the women can't perform, most of the time women make fake cases. So they try to teach me how to be a good bureaucrat and how I can reduce chances of access to my office, because my office was open. So they believe your office not going to be successful, because they think this she's not a good bureaucrat and everybody can access to her. So I listened to them, but I said, look, we are here on the public money and on the taxpayer money, so we have to. So first of all, we made our office accessible through citizen portal, and then I sat with a law department and the social welfare department, and we set up two focal persons at each district level. One is a pro bono lawyer and another was a social welfare officer. We not only notify these two focal persons, we try to train them if the woman is coming with harassment complaint, so she will be not harassed again once in her office, and the same we did with cybercrime and other institution. Then we activate Provincial Harassment Watch Committee, and I must acknowledge KP government here, because at the senior level, all the secretaries and the judiciary and other stakeholders, they cooperate. So I try to utilize that goodwill and the champion within the government institutions, and we were able to get good focal person, and we meet every quarter and we discuss about the compliance of the cases. At the same time, we set up National Human Rights Institutions Focal Persons Committee, and in that committee, every quarter, we discuss, because the harassment at workplace, there are some structural gaps in the law, and most of the administrative cases are coming rather than the harassment cases. At the same time, luckily in 2018 amendment, provincial amendment, we got access to the government, to the education institution that was not exist in a main legislation in 2010. So that was a major breakthrough for us, where we intervene in different universities, and in these universities, we were able to set up their inquiry committees. At the same time, I was able, because I don't want to talk more about the Islamia College judgment, because that is still with the governor. But the recent case of Mardan Hospital, where we protected two women nurses, but still there is one issue with victim blaming is, most of the time, why women are not coming. I was talking to someone, because in 2019, the KP government and then the federal government and then Punjab government, they enacted another law, Women Property Right Act. So there are more than 400 petitions for the property right as compared to the harassment at the workplace. Because the harassment at the workplace, women have to cross barrier within their family, because family says, ये कुछ होने नहीं वाला और आपको बदनामी अलग होगी. So when the family is so scared, you don't get justice, and the media will you will be on the media. And the second thing was the social media. social media, when used against the working women, in most of the cases where they use abusive language for women health workers, women polio workers, and the working women. So that was one challenge. But when we refer, because that was not our jurisdiction, so we refer 35 women cases to the cybercrime unit, and then that was the message for the health department. The women, this is not the ombudsperson jurisdiction, so they can go to the cybercrime unit under the PICA. Then there is another issue, because in most of my cases, I realize when any woman or a girl, they file their petition, the men in that institution, they start they start campaigning against her, because why she went to the ombudsperson office. At the same time, she got less support from her other women in the same institution, because the men, their club is very strong, and the women nexus are very weak in such institutions. And at the same time, I most of the time say it's like the men get together and they try to negotiate with that girl or woman. Please, you have to withdraw your, this is the matter of your institution. You are defaming this institution because of your petition. We have to save our institution because of these harassment cases. It's not good to go to the ombudsperson. And at the same time, even within the government institution, when I conducted my first session with my focal persons, so the one of the focal person said, please, you have to sensitize girls, because they are too much dependent on their makeup and their looks. So अगर ये मेकअप करके ना आए तो फिर दफ्तरों के माहौल से ही रह सकते हैं. So I said, why women makeup is so, you are so vulnerable and naive to control your emotion, because the women can they can attract to a man, but they can't most of the time, because this is our traditional setup. So I think this is basically some of the issues within the law where we are, and hopefully with new amendment, this law will be more stronger. At the same time, we are trying to get more space for this law at the provincial level. After 18 amendment, we already in KP have 2 amendments. In 2020 law, we strengthened this institution, and we are still planning to have this institution at par with other ombudsman institution or ombudsperson institution, because the one of the structural issue with this institution, where within the institutional setup, it's considered like a subsidiary of social welfare or a women institution, because it took 2 years in KP. I was negotiating with all the secretary, establishment, admin, law, and the chief secretary. This institution should be like the main ombudsperson institution. So luckily, I got support from the chief secretary and the 4 provincial secretaries. So now we are with law department, and we got our autonomy as ombudsperson institution. Otherwise, the ombudsperson institution, whether it was in Punjab or in Balochistan, luckily in Sindh, Justice Shah Nawaz, retired Justice Shah Nawaz is there. So he established the writ of the institution, and we follow that example, and now we also separated ourselves from the social welfare as a independent autonomy. So
Thank
I
you.
think
Yeah.
this is the one of initiative I particularly want to share, because an autonomous or institution with some authority can serve better.
I think that's key, and we don't want an institution that's headed by a strong individual, and once they leave, then the institution falls down until someone else comes, and it depends on who it is. So I think it's great to hear that there's efforts being made at a structural and institutional level, rather than just, run by certain faces. And I think you raised some very important points about, victim blaming as well, as to how we hear a lot of times that each time a woman speaks up, whether it's the Me Too movement, whether it's about harassment at the workplace, that often they're accused of lying and of it being a fake case. But we don't really think about how much courage it takes for someone to speak up and the consequences that women really have to face when they do speak up. And we've seen that in cases of very powerful women and how they're vilified in the national media. And otherwise, we have the case of Misha Shafi that's been ongoing for 3 years, which has gone, haywire. And that's sub judice, so discussion on that would not be appropriate. But there's also this aspect of whether there is really access to justice. And that's something you spoke about in the beginning, where you said that, there's some people who try to reduce that access that women have to offices such as yours. And I think that's something very important that has to be talked about as well. We'll move over now to His Excellency Mr. Wouter Plomp, the Ambassador of the Netherlands. And I understand the Netherlands supports a lot of initiatives in Pakistan, but we're also curious to know, what are really best practices from the Netherlands around harassment cases and violence against women cases, and also the narratives around them that are, for example, in media or otherwise. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Osama. And first of all, I'd like to say I'm inspired by the audience. There's obviously great attention for this very important subject. And I'm also inspired by the fact that there's a good mix of men and women, which I think is important, because this is very much about awareness. So it's definitely not only for women, but just as much for men. And I'm also inspired by the fact there's a good mix of age, some of the mature, to which I reckon myself as well, on the first bench, but also young people in the back, for whose future this whole subject is, of course, of vital importance. And maybe to start with, a bit of an uncomfortable truth is, first of all, this whole issue of gender-based violence, it's not limited to a part of the world or to a culture or to a society. It exists everywhere. And it exists just as much in my own country, in all European countries. In fact, there are some staggering statistics that really underline how important and how close to home this subject of gender-based violence is. And one of the most uncomfortable truths is that quite often, or actually in a majority of cases, the survivor knows the perpetrator, or the other way around. It's not an unknown strange creature. No, it's very often someone that is known from the family, from the workplace, or even within a relationship. So this is very much about, and now I'm inspired by Christian, my British colleague, this is about having uncomfortable conversations. Because obviously this is an extremely uncomfortable conversation. And I admire the courage of Madam Ombudsman of setting up an office and creating the access to justice, which is vital. But I would like to point to another aspect, which is, I think, is as vital as the access to justice, that is about prevention. Because indeed it takes an awful lot of courage to speak out on these issues. And wouldn't it be, every case that can be prevented, I think, is an enormous gain. And I think for prevention, we need awareness. And that's why we need the men and the boys as much as the women and the girls. I read just this afternoon a tweet by, I think, UN Women Pakistan, also about gender-based violence, and they had a hashtag running, men as allies. And I think that's actually very true, because it's very much about, I'm pointing at the first row, sorry, all men. It's about you and about me and about us. It's about men being aware of what gender-based violence is. Now, coming to, you asked me, Osama, about best practices. Let me point to two best practices. One actually from maybe my own experience after managing an office for 30 years. And I can clearly see that as a manager, how things have changed in my country, the Netherlands, over the past 30 years. Whereas I recognize the uncomfortableness of if someone speaks out about this, and indeed the tendency there often has been, and sometimes there still is, of blaming the victim, of saying, well, was it really so bad? What actually happened? I think we've now reached a stage, and I can say that confidently as a manager, where the definition of harassment is only with the victim/survivor. It is her, and sometimes him, that defines what to her or him is harassment, not to the perpetrator. The perpetrator will always say, I didn't mean it that way. That's not the point here, sorry. It's about how it's being perceived by the victim/survivor. And I think that is an important gain. Second best practice is actually from the private sector. I visited a company in Sialkot, and there was a very clear commercial interest of the manager or owner of the company in keeping his workforce, and his workforce was mainly women. And obviously, to that company, harassment was an important phenomenon. And he said the only way to get rid of it was that whenever there was a complaint, he would believe, the manager was a he, I have to say, he would believe the complainant, the survivor/victim. And in this case, there wasn't even a trial. He would simply say the fact that the victim was so courageous as to speak out, I believe her, and I say goodbye to the man, often the man, who did this. It may be not completely, let's say in terms of Audi et alteram partem, sitting next to a judge, it's maybe another practice, but this was a practice from the private sector, and the manager assured me that he had a short period in which maybe some dubious cases were there, but after that, the number of complaints dropped sharply, and the women who worked at that company were retained in the workforce, and the manager was very satisfied with that. I leave it here. Thank you.
Now we'll move over to Ms. Vrinda Grover, who's joined us from India Online, and you yourself are a lawyer and a human rights activist in India, and we understand, as spoken, a lot of these issues are across borders, they're everywhere, and especially the issue of harassment, of rape, of blaming the survivors is rampant. So we'd be interested to hear, the issues that that you really see in the mainstream narratives, and I'm also interested to hear of how media representation of such cases has evolved over time, because we all grew up watching Bollywood, and we saw a lot of very ridiculous songs that we sang as kids, and when you grow older, you realize that this is rape culture. This is literally like forcing a woman into acts that she doesn't want by a hero who's charming and who's chasing her, and in the end she gives up, and that's like the biggest Bollywood would hit. And then millions of people are watching this, and this behavior becomes normalized. So I'm interested to, hear about the evolution of representation of such issues in the media. And then also as a lawyer, what legal reforms have taken place in recent years that are good to look at. Thank you.
Thank you, and good evening to everyone. And once again, I'm glad that I'm able to join online and be part of this conversation. It's indeed very good to join a panel with Rakshanda and others who one has known. And I wish we were all together, but another time, I'm sure. Coming to the topic here, which is, of course, of great interest and an area that I passionately work in. And as you very rightly observed, the issue of how cultural stereotypes shape our way of understanding and thinking. And those cultural stereotypes don't actually stop at the doors of the police station or even the courtroom. And while it is very true and correct, and as the ambassador pointed out, we are dealing with the global issue of gender-based violence and violence against women, particularly sexual violence. And at least as far as some research that I have done shows that the laws in South Asia today are perhaps in many ways far ahead of even perhaps laws in the European continent. And I think it's important to underline here that these reforms and changes have come in the law because of a very strong women's movements across India and in many parts of the South Asian region. And those changes have come in the face of the women's movements asking for changes in law, taking to the streets, taking to courts, particularly when confronted with a social system that looks upon women as subordinate, even though the Constitution gives us equal rights, both whether in civil, political, or other rights. It's been a challenge moving this forward. The notion of stereotypes about women, where the issue of consent, as you said in Bollywood's music, songs, romances, is totally missing. The woman's consent is neither sought nor asked for. And the only person who seems to have agency in that narrative, in that sequence, is actually the man. So the woman is denied any identity or sexuality or agency. And therefore, eventually, it becomes, as is the name of this conference, a challenge to her dignity. And countering this notion of rape stereotypes and stereotypes about women is the role of law, which then changes the normative standards within which interactions and interface between men and women is to be understood. I think one of the biggest challenge, particularly for sexual harassment, has been to make it to be understood as a wrong, whether it is to be understood as a misconduct and therefore a workplace wrong, a civil wrong, or a criminal offense. In India, sexual harassment is also an offense under the Indian Penal Code, pursuant to the criminal law reforms of 2013, which came on the back of a huge protest by women's groups, youth groups, young people who took to the streets demanding justice and legal reforms in the face of the very brutal gang rape of a young woman in Delhi who finally succumbed to her injuries. The idea that sexual harassment is a wrong is an ongoing project, I'm sure, in all places, as Rakshanda has pointed out to us. We see in workplaces where you are asked, what is the harm that is caused to her? What is she complaining about? And that is really where you have to go down to the essence of the dignity. And as was pointed out earlier, even through a judgment given by the Indian Supreme Court called Vishakha and others versus State of Rajasthan in 1997, the notion that what conduct is unwelcome, it is unwelcome to the woman, and therefore it is a wrong. And therefore, this kind of behavior should not be accepted, tolerated, or allowed. And it becomes the responsibility and the duty of the employer to ensure that that conduct is not repeated. And it directly impacts on a woman's uh, the productivity with which she works, and her peace of mind and her dignity with which she works. So there continues to be, while we have systems in place, there continues to be a challenge to ensure that sexual harassment is seen as a wrong and is taken up by all workplaces and educational institutions and other institutions as an issue that they need to engage with and put preventative as well as remedial mechanisms in place. Jumping back to the topic of stereotypes, I think this is a very important issue, particularly for the South Asian region. We see that stereotypes about women as well as stereotypes about the raped woman persist, and they tend to overwhelm both the investigating agency as well as very often judicial decisions. And we are at a juncture where at least, and I speak only for India, there is a challenge to this kind of stereotyping, that these are myths. And for instance, there is when a trial takes place, the main challenge that seems to be is how do you move the attention of the investigating agency, the prosecution and judicial adjudication from the character of the woman survivor, to the conduct of the accused. Because what is the subject of investigation and adjudication is the conduct of the accused, whether he has committed an offense. However, the entire focus seems to be on the character of the woman. Was she drinking? What kind of clothes was she wearing? With whom was she socializing? What hour of the day or night was she out? And so the whole, we are embroiled still in looking at the character of the woman, which is not what either the rape offense is about or any other sexual violence is about. And that is the shift that I think we are in the process of transitioning to. Courts in India, particularly the Supreme Court, in a very important judgment in 2021, has actually underlined this aspect of how these stereotypes are should not be allowed to enter the judicial process, and has very interestingly, and I'll just read out a couple of them, has actually almost laid down directives for other judicial officers to pause and consider some of the stereotypes that they have said you need to desist from, and that these are stereotypes, these are myths, which actually first cause this kind of sexual violence partly, and then once again re-victimize the woman and deny her her right to justice. For instance, one of the directives that has now been given is courts should desist from expressing any stereotype opinion in words spoken during proceedings or in the course of a judicial order to the effect that women are physically weak and need protection. Men are the head of the household. Women should be submissive and obedient according to our culture. Good women are sexually chaste. Women should, being alone at night or wearing certain clothes make women responsible for being attacked. As we know, there's this whole narrative about she asked for it. A woman consuming alcohol, smoking, etc., may justify unwelcome advances by men or has asked for it. Testimonial evidence provided by women who are sexually active may be suspect. Women are emotional and often overreact or dramatize events, etc. So here we have a judicial acknowledgement that these rape myths, these stereotypes about women go to the heart of her, to assessing her credibility, and therefore re-victimize and deny her justice. And that is today become an issue of challenge and is a subject which the judiciary itself is increasingly becoming conscious of. And I think those are the kind of changes that we need to see to move forward. I'll stop here for now.
You raised some very pertinent points, and we've seen a lot of progress in Pakistan also. And when I later come to the Honorable Justice of Lahore High Court, I'll reiterate some of the recent judgments that are quite women-friendly and progressive in that sense. We've also seen, going back to victim blaming, we've also seen a lot of this in our mainstream narrative in the recent past. For example, last year we had the motorway rape case in which the CCPO, the head of the police in Lahore, said, why did this woman take this route at night? Why did she not check the fuel in her car? Why did she stop on the motorway? And no questions were raised as to why was there no security or why were the men raping her? And that's where really the questions belong. And then we unfortunately had, government officials defending him, and so far that our very own prime minister went on foreign media and said men are not robots. If a woman is dressed a certain way, they might, later we were told that that was taken out of context. And luckily, the prime minister did clarify, took back his words, and said that the blame always lies with the perpetrator of sexual crime. So we're glad that he did that. But the impact of such statements is so deep rooted. I have a friend who works in sales and marketing, and he was at one of the stores where these young women were there to decorate the store. And the store manager, who was a young boy, said that, oh, because she's wearing these clothes, I'm going to go, make a pass at her in a certain way, and was, speaking about her in a degrading manner. And when my friend intervened and said, you cannot do this, so he said, मैं robot तो नहीं हूँ, right? So what the prime minister says has an actual impact on ground on how people behave. But on the other hand, if the prime minister was to make powerful statements and lay the blame where it lies, it would also have a very good impact in improving safety for women in society. So I think these are also messages that we need to keep reiterating. And I think the women activists in Pakistan, as always, have been, fire bearers of this message that have written to, all the powerful men. And we have women like Asma Jahangir and others who started the Women's Action Forum during a dictator's rule and have resisted. And like you rightly pointed out, in South Asia, the laws are quite progressive because of the struggle of the women leaders, and the feminist leaders that we've had in history. So now I come to Ms. Nigat Dad, who's a lawyer, and she's executive director of the Digital Rights Foundation. They run the cyber harassment helpline in Pakistan, which is, the first cyber harassment helpline in the region, dedicated to helping survivors of harassment on the internet. And she also, as a lawyer, represents survivors of harassment in courts. So my question to you, Nigat, really is, I know the helpline, helps direct cases to the FIA that deals, that's the investigation agency for cyber crimes related to harassment. And I know that the FI is also thankful to the DRF in many cases where DRF offers legal services and also counseling to people who call. So, my organization, Bolobi, we also work in digital rights, and whenever we get calls, we're like, call the DRF helpline. So it's super helpful in that way. But I'm interested to know what kind of, fears do women have when they're approaching the legal system, when they're filing a complaint, or when they're going to court? What are the hindrances that we see in women, in the cyber harassment laws, but also the harassment laws in general? And Mr. Akshanda, shed some light on that. So it'd be wonderful to hear from you on what's stopping women from accessing justice.
Yeah. Thank you, Sama, and thanks to other fellow panelists who have actually set the stage. I think one thing that we haven't touched upon is actually elephant in the room, which is not just the structural issue of victim blaming, जो कि हमारे माशरे का ही हिस्सा है, but also why women do not usually speak up. It's actually fear of the regressive laws. Oftentimes what we have seen, women who have spoken up, especially in recent times, and I'm thankful to young women who are using technology and internet to speak up. But then we have laws like criminal defamation law. So we are talking about regulations, good laws. We have good laws. There are like these recent amendments in anti-rape ordinance, definitely really good. But I think the question is, where is the implementation, right? We had anti-rape amendments back in 2016 in PPC, but then again, we didn't see any implementation in those laws. And the criminal defamation, so we have one criminal defamation law in the, in our PPC, and then we have civil defamation law, and then we have cyber criminal defamation, in the Prevention of Electronic Crimes Act. And that's where, एक तो आपके जो survivors हैं, वो ऑफलाइन स्पेस में विक्टिम ब्लेमिंग बर्दाश्त करते हैं, फिर आ गई आपकी टेक्नोलॉजी और इंटरनेट, फिर वहाँ पे वो बर्दाश्त करते हैं, एंड देन उसके ऊपर आ जाता है आपका cyber crime laws. So section 20, you know that, right? In Prevention of Electronic Crimes Act, that particular provision has been weaponized against survivors and victims इतनी दफ़ा to silence them. So अगर वो कोई हिम्मत पकड़ भी लें बोलने की और अदालतों तक जाने की, and they know it's a like difficult road ahead for them when it comes to trial. They go to courts so there are different battles that they are fighting. एक तरफ वो battle लड़ रही हैं अपनी अदालतों में, दूसरी तरफ वो लड़ रही हैं victim blaming की, and then counter defamation suits जो उन पे होते हैं. So I think this is very important thing that we really need to discuss, that the laws that we have, how those laws are being weaponized against survivors and victims, and not just victims and survivors, against journalists, against activists. We have been saying for such a long time, जब Prevention of Electronic Crimes Act बन रहा था, I can see Faratullah Babar Saab sitting here, and along with him, we actually lobbied with the then government the kind of laws you are making, you are making those laws in the name of protecting women in the online space. But ये आगे जाके इन्हीं के खिलाफ इस्तेमाल होंगे. So far what we have seen is, it's good that we have law enforcement agency, it's good that we have regulator like Pakistan Telecommunication Authority, but I guess we also need to see their performance, what they have done so far, in 5 years. The same section 20, which was enacted, which was added into the law to protect survivors or victims of online harassment, has been weaponized against them. And we have been pushing the government, abhi bhi, us waqt bhi, कि please आपके already defamation के laws हैं, इस तरह के sections को निकालें जो weaponize हो रहे हैं लोगों के खिलाफ. But no, we still have that law. So I think it's very important to talk about, good that we have laws, but I think implementation की इतनी बात नहीं होती है. And then the bad laws that we have, how to get rid of them, I think that's very important question that we need to ask ourselves and need to ask, the relevant actors. And one thing that I would like to say, there are so many cases that are going on in the courts. एक तो एडिड प्रेशर होता है औरतों के ऊपर जब वो बात करती हैं, उसके बाद फैमिली से प्रेशर होता है, फिर इर्द गिर्द से प्रेशर होता है, ऑनलाइन विक्टिम ब्लेमिंग होती है, एंड देन दे गो टू कोर्ट, एंड द काइंड ऑफ क्वेश्चंस दैट द फेलो लॉयर्स आस्क देम, उनकी करेक्टर असैसिनेशन होती है, एंड आई एम सॉरी टू से द कोर्ट डजंट से एनीथिंग. And it's really disappointing and discouraging for the survivors that they don't really want to go to the courts. And that's why we really need to see why Me Too started. Me Too started because survivors really gave up on the laws. And they didn't see that there is a easy road to justice. So I think it's very important that we need to look within what our judiciary is doing, what our lawyers are doing, what are the relevant actors, policy makers are doing. If we need amendments, where are those amendments? If we need to get rid of problematic laws, क्या हम उसके लिए उतनी कोशिश कर रहे हैं या नहीं? So I'll stop here and
I just want to add one.
Please do.
We talked about women. During my cases in 2 years, I realized in harassment law used against men by men, especially in the education institution, the men, they disguise themselves under the women DPs, and then the universities, they threw their good students, some of the students, and the tea. So I think it's like a blasphemy law where most of the Muslim, they were victimized under this blasphemy law, And the same time, this harassment law used, particularly when I had my open court in the Gomal University, the actual harassment cases where women were victimized, university administration was silent. But they use harassment against their good professors as well.
Yes, and I think at universities it's endemic, right? We saw recently in IBA, one student saw one member of the administration harass a woman colleague, and the student spoke up. What did IBA do? They expelled that student and said, oh, you cannot be speaking up. You're ruining the reputation of the university. When in reality, he's working to protect people at the university. Well, after a lot of struggle and noise, he was reinstated, and he's back at the university. So that's the power of people's voices. Now, we come to the Honorable Justice Ali Bakr Najafi of the Lahore High Court. And, Nigat's points intervention were a good segue to the next, section. And I would just like to recall a few judgments in the past few years. We've had Justice Mansoor Ali Shah at the Supreme Court, who in one of the cases said that a woman's character cannot be questioned in a case of harassment, right, or of rape. And I think that's a wonderful precedent for the courts to follow. And in the Lahore High Court itself, we've had the Justice Aisha Malik's case in which the two-finger test was deemed illegal and scrapped from practices in rape cases, in which the rape victims or survivors were being re-traumatized by checking their character, which was an ancient old practice that had to be done away with. So there has been some movement, but of course at the same time, I think especially with the proliferation of technology, we're seeing a lot more evidence being recorded of cases, and we're seeing a lot more people speaking up. So I think the critical mass of such cases, I wouldn't call it critical yet, but people are reporting more and more cases, and there is a lot of burden on the courts. Now it's up to the courts also now how do they deal with this. There has been talk about gender courts, and I think recently in the new law, they're also setting up special courts for trying cases related to rape. But my question really, Honorable Justice, would be, what are some steps that the judiciary can take to make the courts more welcoming space for women who have been suffering to approach the courts and to be able to come and say, this is what happened with me, and be confident that they will get justice?
Thank you very much, Mr. Osama. It's a great pleasure to be here in this very distinguished panel on a very sensitive topic of discussion. Let me congratulate the organizers of this conference of Asma Jahangir Foundation. It's, I think, the third conference, and it's so far a great success. The best part of this conference is that you come across with people of divergent ideas, and then you have a chance to listen to them, and then, of course, go to the very sensitive areas where we normally don't talk about. Now, a lot of things have been said by our friend participant from India, His Highness from Netherlands, and the ombudsperson and the Nigat, the advocate. Well, I'll pick up the point from the Nigat where you have left. We have pointed out that, in fact, because especially my area of dispensation of justice, you are right that there has to be a different approach for a victim by the judges and by lawyers. There's no doubt about that. But let me put it this way: let us admit this fact that we are a patriarchal society. In the society, in the rural background particularly, these rights of women, this concept of sexual harassment, gender-based violence, this is not been acknowledged there. And because of the movement like Asma Jahangir Foundation and other, because throughout her life he has been portraying and has been struggling for these women's rights, and other movements also, other NGOs have been working on this area. At this point of time, at least we have defined something. We have law in place. and we are open to discussion, because if there's some incident of violence, this sort of a violence, the victim has a chance, because he has been hearing in the media and he has been hearing the social media, that if there is a situation, he can file a complaint, as you pointed out, on the cybercrime area. Now, this is an improvement. 10 years ago, or maybe 7, 8 years ago, this was not the idea at all. Whereas in the world at large, in the other part of the world, this was accepted as a fact. This is an achievement, I would say. No, but this is not enough. We have to go far away. Every member of our society, the legal community, the social other communities, and the social media, and these people will have to join together, because it is not to be controlled by one part of our society. We have to accept this fact that this gender-based violence is not good for our society. It has to be curbed. And how? There are many ways. For us, for particularly for courts, I think your question is very important, and I would like to answer in this way, that we should train the judges who are dealing with these kind of cases. We should train the lawyers who are dealing with these kind of cases, and we should provide an atmosphere in the courtroom in which the victim is free to narrate his story, and freely, without any pressure, without any, one way of doing that is that if you are, if a witness is narrating something in front of the perpetrator, perhaps it will be difficult for the victim to narrate the whole story. So it can be, there could be a scene, that person can be away from the, or he can see the victim but should not be physically there. Other things is that you have to, I would say that this is high time that we should categorize number of cases, the type of cases. Some cases should be put in fast track. Some cases should be put in a way that the timeline must be fixed for those cases. I mean, this is for us to do, but I'm trying to share it with you, believing that there are lawyers here in the hall, and if we can, curtail the time span which is spent for the conclusion of such type of cases, if it can be reduced, that can encourage the victims and the survivors to come forward and file their complaint in the court. Well, talking for our system, I have always, observed a policy in my courtroom that whenever such type of cases are brought in, my first question to the lawyer, to the prosecution, to the other side, is that, from the accused side, is that, what do you think would be the reason to raise this kind of a serious allegation in our society, in which it takes the stakes are very high for a woman to level this kind of allegation, think the consequences of it. So first satisfy me that why this offense was reported, if there was no substance in it. And then secondly, we try to, avoid these kind of questions which will put the victim into embarrassing situation. I mean, it depends on judges. That's why I'm saying that if the judges are trained properly, then they will be able to understand the consequences of the questions. And of course, then we will have to, see the way the matter is being reported in the media, because, media catches things which do sensitize, which create sensation in the society. So that aspect has to be discouraged, I think. But at the same time, what I think is that we have to follow very robust policy, right from our own homes, in our families, in our communities, in our cities, in our colleges, wherever we are working. Unless we accept it as a fact inside us. I mean, if we don't practice at home, how can we convince the others that you should not do that? Because the honesty is, I think, what is required. If you honestly believe in something, then it will have a compact, real impact of the solution and answer to those questions. I think now we should also try to understand the different type of gender issues, because Heretofore, we have not been able to understand what was the forced impregnation. These are the new categories: forced impregnation, marital rape, and forced marriages has been quite some time we've come across. And inheritance question. These are different type of harassments. If a woman is being deprived of his inheritance right, it's wrong. It's depriving his right. And if the male family members, they come to physical, beating her or doing physical violence not to claim that right, that is also gender-based violence. And unfortunately, in many societies, particularly in rural areas, this is justified. That's why our purpose is to make sure that we don't provide the justification of this violence. The justification can be on the religious basis, औरत नाक़िसुल असर नाक़ितुल असर है. I mean, she can't understand things properly. At times she doesn't understand things. उसको इल्म नहीं है. She's uneducated. She's not aware of her rights. So this approach has to be changed. And I think, as I said, that it is not only one type of persons who are responsible to improve it. It is as a whole society will have to join together and to make the better place for our future generations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Justice Saab. That was very well said, and I think you've given some concrete framework as to the road forward. Now, luckily, the conference has asked us for me to prepare a resolution that will be, at the end of each session that will be passed, I think, at the final session. So I just wanted to go over some of the key points that we've discussed. And if the panel agrees, then I can forward that. So one, we start by believing victims and survivors. Two, that women should club together and support each other at workplaces. Three, that strong women's movements that ask for changes in laws need to be supported, and even if they're not supported, the women are strong enough to take these forward, as we've seen in South Asia. And also, we need to revise criminal defamation laws so that they don't victimize the survivors further. And then we need to train judges and lawyers so that they can deal with these cases with sensitivity and in a better way, and avoid questions that embarrass victims. So these are just, the chunk, a lot of the chunk of the... We'll come to you, Gigi.
I just want to add one recommendation, because if you want to see, you can see on Ombudsperson Facebook, because we already placed there, because we started our committee from the Governor's Secretariat, CM Secretariat, Assembly Secretariat, because most of the institution, like our assemblies, are, because already we manage with police, but with the bar associations, with the parliament, I think there is a need. They should follow the KP, where we were able to set up our harassment committees, at the same time display of the code of conduct. So some of the institutions, particularly the parliament and the bars, they are reluctant to set up harassment watch committees, because law clearly says any organization, association, corporation should have their code of conduct. And another area, because we are hoping for the federal law, because when we call about workplace harassment, under workplace harassment, the domestic servants and the home-based workers, they both are left in the law. Either government should have the Domestic Servants Act for their protection, or the domestic servant should be included in the new legislation in the definition part.
Yes, I think Punjab and Sindh have passed their laws for domestic workers, and the Islamabad, the National Assembly is, I think, also about to pass it. It's been brought in. But those are very important points, because domestic workers... Exactly. Domestic workers face a brunt of the harassment that no one speaks about because of the intersection of class and gender, that a lot of times is avoided. Now, I've been told by the organizing committee that we're moving to the marquee for the closing session, but I don't want to do that without any questions from the audience. So if, with the permission of the panel, if we could just quickly take maybe a couple of brief questions or brief comments, if you please, because, it would be very bad if we don't do that.
In many cases, there's a motive behind such complaints. And ultimately, end of the day, the truth comes out that this is the reason why this victim was implanted or, false allegation. That's right. But it has to come through a process of law. I mean, a complaint has to go to the court, and then, of course, the cross-examination is pointed out. That's digging out the truth through the questioning of the victim. That is essential. But of course, I agree that for this purpose, there has to be, properly trained judges should be there, because they should know where the red line, where the red line is not to be crossed. It's not an ordinary case. It's not an ordinary trial. Yeah, I agree with you, because that is the requirement. What not to be asked, and what to be asked. Yes, that's right. And secondly, I think you said mindset is very important. Mindset is very important.
There is a rules and regulation of the Honorable High Court that the question of character assassination would not be put to the person.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Without the prior permission of the person.
That's right. That's right. You pointed out the mindset of the people. I think you're right, because this is the time. And how can we improve the mindset? Because of the religious nature of our society, I think the religious clergymen should also be involved, because they have a lot of influence on our society. They should be persuaded. They should be, there's a religious background of it. I mean, all good religions have, what we are saying is not saying something which is deplored by any particular religion. It is approved in all religions, because women have been respected in all religions. And as we claim that in Islam it is respected higher than any other religion, though the practices, not to the level which it should have been. So I think to change the mindset, the religious clergymen and the influential people in the society, the elderly person should be involved. They should be sensitized and they should be persuaded, I think.
Absolutely, it has to be a collective effort. Otherwise, if just one part is focusing on it, we'll take a last brief question or comment and then move over to the marquee.
Dear panel, I've got a very bad throat, so please pardon my voice. It sounds like a monster speaking to you, but that's how it is. My suggestions would be, since we are limiting ourselves only to the harassment and to the cyber crimes, digital rights, I think in my practice, I've gone through one, I would say it blocks me there, and one problem, and which is the courts, what they first and foremost see is consent of the woman. If she's not a minor, they would, because the other side would bring proofs of the consent, that the lady is sitting with the man, she's laughing, and she's doing, this thing out of her own free will. So they are granted bails on this, and they are acquitted because of this. Or, okay, we argue that consent is immaterial. Even then, the courts, they do not, pay like any attention to it. Number second is because the punishment is so, like it would be 2 years or 3 years. I believe the punishment should be enhanced in such like cases, because a woman is, after going through her videos going viral, not only she dies, like not the physical death, but she's dying every day, because the whole of the village is there to see the drama being repeated in the courts every day. And one more thing, with your permission, I'd like to add, that what can be more violent and harassing than a woman, she's my friend, who went missing like 3 weeks ago. She is She's an American citizen. She came to Pakistan, leaving her children with her sister in UK only for their safety because she belongs to a particular sect. And we are moving from pillar to post. Which door did I not knock in this country? I went to media. I went to, police, from Islamabad police to Pindi police, from Pindi to Islamabad, and then we went to habeas corpus, and we are given 20 days date. A woman is missing, and we are charging a person by name, and we know where she is, and we know where he's keeping her, and nobody is doing anything. My request, why I came here, my request to you would be to kindly look into this type of violent act and violence against a woman. I mean, her minor children are stranded in UK. She is missing in Pakistan, and she has to go back to USA, and nobody is doing anything. I mean, the judiciary is also कि आप कोई बात नहीं, हम notice कर देते हैं CPO साहब को. CPO साहब एक दफ़ा भी investigation में साहब को नहीं बुलाते, उनसे नहीं पूछते कि where is the body, जो उसका actual जो मकसद है वो करने का. So my request is to kindly look into the previous suggestions that I have given and to this particular case as well, because we don't want one more Noor Muqaddam या उससे भी worse होना उसके साथ. उसके बच्चे wait कर रहे हैं. The bachas have lost their father in an unfortunate incident 4 years ago, but they don't want to lose their mother. Thank you very much. Yes, Your Honor, but it's like the dates that we get are for 20 days, and now the second date that we are getting is on this 22nd. Yes, Your Honor, I'm pursuing it myself because none is in Pakistan to pursue it on her behalf. I am doing everything possible, moving from pillar to post, and this was my last resort that I might be able to get something for that woman to be recovered and produced. Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'm very grateful to the panelists for staying beyond the time, with apologies that we started a little late. So thank you very much for sharing your wisdom with us. We have an 8-point resolution that has been forwarded to the Secretariat, so hopefully that'll be passed also. And thank you for the audience for being wonderful, for being a part of this, and I hope the conversation can continue. Thank you.